Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Stu McKenzie. I'm Deputy Director with the Criminal Investigations and Network Analysis, or CINA Center, hosted here at George Mason University. It's great to see a few people here in person and many of you online for this first in our fall series of talks on key crime topics. If you are joining us online today, please don't forget to mute your microphones. And as usual, you can submit questions to us via the chat. CINA's Director, Dr. Jim Jones, is kindly going to curate a question and answer session at the end of today's talk. Please don't forget to join us on November 11th. By the way, we're going to host a talk by Marie Tillier on the formation and prevention of high-density crime hotspots in major U.S. cities. And also on December 7th, we've got a talk by Lindsay Robertson of the Human Trafficking Institute. She's going to be talking about innovative ways and data-driven ways to combat modern slavery. So to stay on top of these and other upcoming events, don't forget to check out our website, where you can also find information about our research programs and our workforce development activities, and make sure you're on our mailing list for those as well. It is a great pleasure this afternoon to welcome our distinguished speaker, Ms. Gretchen Peters. Gretchen serves as the Executive Director of the Center on Illicit Networks and Transnational Organized Crime. She's also the founder of the Alliance to Counter Crime Online. She's worked with a variety of organizations on transnational organized crime, corruption, and in recent years, the illicit trade on wildlife, including U.S. Central Command and U.S. Special Operations Command, I think, as well as the OECD, where she led a task force on combating the illicit trade in wildlife, and a battery of wildlife non-profits and governments. And I had the pleasure of supporting a little bit of her work when she was a senior policy advisor with the Terrorism, Transnational Crime and Corruption Center here at Mason. We're joined by the director of that center, Louise Shelley, online today. Just because I know our audience, I'm going to give a very brief shout out to Gretchen's book, which we don't normally do, but for this crowd, Gretchen's book, Seeds of Terror, is actually a very timely and important discussion of drugs, the Taliban, and threat finance in Afghanistan. And for things that are going on in 2021, this is going to be a great read for those of you looking at the intersections between transnational organized crime and threat finance. And also those of you trying to get ahead on how current dramatic changes in Afghanistan are going to affect the counter-narcotics picture within the United States. Again, that's Seeds of Terror by Gretchen Peters. So I've talked for long enough. Gretchen's going to speak to us a little bit this afternoon about how organized crime has weaponized social media. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Gretchen Peters.
Thank you, Stu. Thank you, Stu. That was a very impressive introduction done all extemporaneously. I'm very impressed how much you remember. So I'm excited to be here to talk about the way that illicit actors, including terrorists, gangs, organized criminals, and in many cases just sort of lone wolf criminal actors, have utilized the tools that social media provide to engage in all manner of illegal activities. Just to give you a quick introduction on us, the Alliance to Counter Crime Online started off mostly like a support group among academics and activists who were looking at crime and seeing this explosion in illicit activity happening on social media platforms, mainly Facebook-owned platforms, just because they're in part because they're the biggest and have the biggest reach, in part because the company does so little to stop the problem. And we'll be coming back to that later. And we kind of spent months and months literally just meeting for coffee or beers to commiserate about how depressed and anxious we were about the rapid pace at which our crime sectors were growing thanks to social media. And finally, after about 6 months of meeting informally, we decided to form the Alliance because we realized we could be stronger together. And that we were seeing the same patterns across criminal sectors, whether it was human trafficking, drugs, wildlife, timber, guns, child sex abuse imagery, and we thought we'd have a better shot of getting change to the laws and to the way that cyberspace is governed, and also that we would have, that it would support our joint research to be hearing what other researchers were doing. And so we gather on a regular basis just for conference calls or online Zoom calls to compare notes about what we're working on, and we work together to try and bring change to the way that cyberspace is governed. And we'll be talking more about that today. But I should say we now have more than 40 members from around the world. We're looking at everything from, as I said, drugs and human trafficking to things that I didn't even know were a thing a few years ago, like the illegal trade in tarantulas or the illegal trade in seahorses. Who knew that was a $150 million a year industry? But it is. And it's happening on a smartphone near you. So anyway, we can come back to that later. The scale of people using social media today is unprecedented. About half the global population and the majority of Americans and the vast majority of young Americans are on social media, often multiple platforms. Facebook obviously is the world's biggest platform with about a third of the world's people logging on a regular basis. YouTube is in second place with 2.3 billion regular users, WhatsApp with 2 billion. So if you think about it, Facebook has 2.9 billion monthly active users. If Facebook were a country, it would be bigger than China and India combined. So it's immensely powerful. It connects an unprecedented number of people in an environment that's free, anonymous, and mostly almost 100% unregulated. Teenagers and young people are especially active on social media, not just in the United States, but around the world. One recent survey says 45% say they are online almost constantly. We're also tracking the rise in crime on some of the newer platforms like Snapchat and TikTok, which function differently than traditional Facebook, but have provided new opportunities for criminals to manipulate users or scam them or sell illegal stuff. And I also want to just add the caveat that the vast majority of people come online to social media to do legal things, to share pictures of their kids or their friends or their pets or the meal that they just ate, or to write a review of something, or to in other way, or to gather with friends to discuss an issue that they care about. Maybe they are all fans of corgis, or maybe they like hula hooping, or there's all sorts of reasons to form groups and to get followers that are completely innocuous, and even and as social media firms are at pains to point out whenever they're dragged before Congress, there are all sorts of positive societal movements that have come out of social media, whether it's the Me Too movement or Black Lives Matter. There are a lot of big social movements today that, or even aspects of the Arab Spring globally, that have been driven by this connectivity. But there's also a dark side. There's also a dark side to social media, and one of the problems that we see as people who study it and activists who work on it is that the laws are not written to incentivize tech platforms, and they on their own are not incentivized to put up speed bumps to slow that will slow the bad actors down or prevent them from operating at all. You're never going to prevent them 100%, but to slow them down and restrict the majority of illicit content, and to uplift the good stuff. So we're concerned about what we can do to make that change. What we're seeing, and what is incredibly alarming to us who watch these sectors, is that, this is an area where we really need to do, there really is a need for more academic analysis, there's a definite correlation between the rise and the ubiquity of the smartphone and the rise and ubiquity of social media. The number of members that we have tracking various types of populations, everything from reptiles to birds, parrots, toucans, insects, as I said, tarantulas, all sorts of invertebrates, mammals, elephants, rhinos, tigers, cheetahs, that have so many species have gone into population collapse in the last decade. And that collapse coincides with the rise of social media and the rise of the smartphone. And the markets for all those animals that I just mentioned shifted in that time period onto social media. And this is not just limited to wildlife, it's one example. The instances, if you look at the data coming out of NCMEC, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, the amount of child porn, which is now referred to as child sex abuse content, which is a much more appropriate title for it, has gone up exponentially, 7,000%. It went from being a problem that was horrible but somewhat manageable by our law enforcement to being something an issue that is completely out of control. And I'll come back to those numbers. Same with drugs. More than 93,000 Americans died from drug-related deaths last year. That far outpaces the number of drug deaths the United States suffered during the crack cocaine epidemic, the black tar heroin epidemic, just to mention two recent drug epidemics. It was not even anywhere near that number of deaths per year. But we're not seeing, as we were during both of those epidemics, these major drug markets in the street. Why is that? Because those drug markets are now on your phone. And the people that are dying at a faster rate than anyone else are young people. In many cities last year, drug-related deaths among people from the ages of 18 to 30 far outpaced COVID. In fact, the number of people who died from drug-related deaths in the United States in 2020, the worst year on record, was about a fifth of the number of people who died from the coronavirus. So, it was really kind of a shadow epidemic that was plaguing this country, particularly certain parts of the country, but it's a problem that is it's irrelevant, your race, your class, your ethnicity, anything. It's hitting people across this country in all groups. And so one of the things that alarms us is the extent to which social media is fueling an exponential growth in multiple crime sectors. And this is being driven by the algorithms that amplify content that causes engagement, and it also connects people that might not have otherwise found each other. And we're going to come back to that, but it's a really important issue that we're talking about. So today we're going to talk about how ECrime works, how criminals function on social media, looking at some of the main platforms. We're going to look at some of the major online crime sectors, but not all of them that we track at ACCO. We're going to look at some of the key laws that are, I would say, not governing cyberspace. I should change that. And we're going to look at a few tips for staying safe online. This particular chart is specific to social media. Criminals and terrorists also use certain e-commerce platforms like eBay and some cloud services like Dropbox, sometimes video services like Zoom and chat services like WhatsApp are used as well. But I want to mainly talk today about how criminals advertise on a social media news feed like Facebook. First, or Instagram or TikTok. First, you create a post advertising goods. We're going to be looking at some of those in a few minutes. It might just feature a picture of your product. It might feature a description or words printed on top of the item. It might have your phone number or a way to contact the seller underneath it or embedded within the image. We're going to see more about that later. And then that person will often build a group or a page or a hashtag, so they will adopt a hashtag that's popular in that crime sector, and they will try to build a community of followers. If they're on Facebook, they will probably create a group, and if their crime is something that Facebook takes seriously, they will probably create a private or even secret group, and that will make it harder, or that will raise their chances of getting away with it. People who see the stuff will either like it or they'll post a message underneath the image saying, hey, I like this, how much is it? And then there will be the process where they negotiate either you can sometimes, we used to see a lot more examples of the sale being negotiated right under the image of it in the chat underneath the photo. Increasingly today, we see the seller saying, contact me on Messenger, contact me on WhatsApp, or they move even to an outside encrypted platform. Then there's the issue of the payment being made. That will often come through the same platform, through Facebook Pay, for example, or they will use a separate payment service like Venmo or PayPal, or in some cases, if it's drugs being delivered or a sex trade, the payment will be made in cash when the two people meet up. And then finally, the seller will deliver whatever the illegal goods are, either through a courier or in person. And again, that's very dependent on whether it's something that's being sent internationally or if it's something that's being delivered locally. In the case that what is being sold is a criminal video, say a pornographic video, or a live video show of animals being tortured, a snuff video, or child sex, and believe me, I'm sorry to say, all of those things are happening right on your smartphone. Every single step of the criminal supply chain can occur on a single platform. So this is why we think that the platforms, even in the cases where these last few steps have to take place off of the platform, we still think that the platforms should bear significant liability because the platform is taking part in or facilitating, and in many cases profiting off of, significant portions of the criminal supply chain. But unfortunately, right now, that's not happening, so we'll come back to that. So first, I want to talk about the deadly drug problem. There's two sides of the narcotics or the drug problem on social media. One of them is the issue of illegal narcotics, and it's very easy to go online, especially Snapchat and Instagram platforms in the United States that are very popular with young people, college kids and teens, and young Americans, and within 2 clicks. Within 2 searches, be talking to a dealer who's selling, cocaine or LSD or marijuana or that kind of stuff. The other side of the problem, which I think is the much bigger problem, but we've never been able to quantify it because it's so varied, and a lot more research is needed to be done on this issue, is the issue of counterfeit pharmaceuticals. And that could include opioids is the biggest number, we think. 70%, I believe it was 70% of the drug-related deaths in 2020, or about 1 in 4. No, I'm doing it wrong. 1 in 4 had fentanyl in them. 70% of the drug-related deaths were related to opioids, and at least 1 in 4 of the pills that was being sold was laced with fentanyl, which is a uber powerful form of heroin that's like 100 times stronger than heroin. And so just one flake of it can kill a person if it's inside your pill. So dealers or drug traffickers like it because you have to smuggle a much smaller amount to get a huge number of people high. But you have to cut it down to such a minute fragment that it's very easy to put too much in just a single pill. That's why the DEA has just come out with a public education campaign called One Pill Can Kill. It's actually wrong. Half a pill can kill. Many of the families we're working with who are members of the Alliance lost their kid to half a pill that they thought they were buying. They apparently thought they were getting a Vicodin or a Percocet or an oxycodone. Many of them had sports injuries that they had gotten, or they maybe had gotten hooked on opioids, or they just knew that if they took that thing, it would make whatever the pain they had go away, or they had anxiety issues and they wanted to relax. But they thought, in every case we're aware of, they thought that they were getting a prescription drug that somebody had gotten the prescription for it and were selling it illegally through social media. They did not realize they were getting a counterfeit pill, and they certainly didn't realize it had poison in it. The other drugs that pharmaceuticals that we increasingly see counterfeits being sold are things like Viagra and Cialis, very popular, steroids, anything related to diabetes or hypertension, all sorts of things that a wide number of Americans have that are expensive to treat. Increasingly, and we saw a lot of this went up during the pandemic, their drug costs are going up, insurance is covering less and less of their prescriptions, and so people are going online, and they think they're buying drugs, in many cases, from pharmacies that operate out of Canada and Mexico. In reality, it's just a dealer. It's illegal, and the Association for Safe Online Pharmacies believes that about 94% of the pharmacies that you find online, whether you search for it on Google or Bing, or whether you find it on Facebook, 94% of them are illegal. And who knows what they're selling. So we have no idea how many people died of counterfeit pharmaceuticals, or die from counterfeit pharmaceuticals in the United States, simply because a lot of people in their families probably don't know. So say your Aunt Marcia has a heart condition, but her Medicare donut doesn't cover all of her expenses. So she goes online, she thinks she's found this Canadian pharmacy where she can get it for less. 3 months later, she's dead. Does anybody know that happened? Does anybody do an autopsy? Because she had a heart condition. So it's a huge gaping problem that nobody can get their hands around. And of course, as I was saying to Stu before this began, there's a ton of money that is going in to study tech, but 99% of it is paid for by tech. So one thing you can be assured of is that the tech firms do not want anybody studying this issue. And so it's very hard to get the resources to look into this in a comprehensive way. Oh, there it is. That was the number I was looking for. 60% of deaths were synthetic opioids in 2020. Here's a couple of examples. We just pulled these last week. This is off of Instagram. Somebody with, that would be really hard, I think, for Instagram's moderators to find, is that person a drug dealer? I don't know. Their handle is stimulants, coke, meth. Or this guy, buy Chicago OxyContin. Really, really tough to find that. That's going to take some complicated algorithms to search that out. We see a number of things. We see one of the things that we see is that dealers will misspell the drugs slightly. So some of the platforms, and some platforms are better than others. Some, like Instagram, are shockingly bad at removing this stuff. Even when it's reported to them, we report a lot of the drug dealers to them, and they take almost none of them down. They'll start spelling them wrong, and they'll do other things like embed words over a photo if they want to put a name up that's more innocuous. But they've got a group of followers. The dealers will also change their accounts on a regular basis. And the biggest, by far, platform in the United States for drug dealers is Snapchat. And that's because of the disappearing function in that platform. Snapchat's logo is actually the ghost. So we think that Snapchat should lose the immunity shield that they have. Because what does a ghost do? It disappears, just like the drug things, and it's made it the drug content that they're selling, and it's made it created tremendous challenges for law enforcement in trying to track back to the dealers that are killing hundreds of kids every month because the content disappears within a few hours. Another issue we look at is work and romance scams. To be honest, again, this has just gone through the roof, and we get more engagement on our social media and our platform and our website on this issue than any others, and than any other. And I really think that the amount of people being scammed on social media and on dating sites is much, much higher than anybody realizes. In a romance scam, or actually a get-rich-quick scam, there's actually two victims. There's the person who gets scammed, and then there's the person whose identity is stolen and used to create these fake profiles to bilk people from innocent victims. We see a lot more of the work scams outside of the United States, in particular in places like Africa and India and the subcontinent, where people get promised schemes to make easy wealth or potentially a job that's in another country. They just have to send some money to get to be qualified to get the job, and then the posting disappears and the person's lost their money. In the worst cases, some of these online scammers could be human traffickers, and I'll come back to that later. Last year, the FBI finally started looking into this issue in a more systematic way, and they said that they thought Americans lost more than $300 million to romance scammers. I think the number is probably far, far higher, just based on our own the amount of feedback that we get. But it's a huge new issue that essentially was created by social media, and I'll talk about that a little bit now. These are the scammers set up. These are actual scam accounts. This is actually a guy named Brian Denney. Brian is one of our members, and his profile, I mean, I remember he's by far our best looking member. And I remember the first time he dialed in for a call, and I was texting one of the other members, like, who is that hot dude who's in our group now? And she was like, that's Brian. That's the guy whose picture is used. And he is a retired colonel, happily married, has 3 kids, lives not far from here in Virginia. And Brian has said for the past 2 or 3 years, he basically has to break up with a woman he's never met pretty much every week. And one of the things, I don't think he talks about this very much, but there's at least one person who was scammed by his image who committed suicide. She lost her entire life savings. She was devastated to think that she wasn't actually in this relationship. The pain for the people whose identity is stolen is as real as it is for the people who are being scammed out of the money. But they are, in many cases, prominent people. Stephen Townsend is a 4-star general and in the Army. I think he's retired now. Diamond Platnumz is a real rapper. And so people will use the actual well-known people, but they will also choose people in positions of trust. We see a lot of CEOs, doctors, first responders, a ton of military officers. I recently did a project on my work side unrelated to ACCO that involved reaching out to about 20 commanders from the Afghan and Iraq wars. And 80% of them had some kind of website or a LinkedIn page or something that said somewhere on it, I am a happily married man. If you think that that you're in a relationship with me, it's like 80% of them had their identities stolen. It's incredible how much. And the other interesting thing is that a lot of the gangs that are doing this are coming out of West Africa. They call themselves the Yahoo Boys. We've got a member who's tracking them. And they are actually, seem to be the same gangs that were doing those. Remember the Nigerian banking scam a few years ago when you got the email saying that you were, like a decade ago, that your long-lost uncle had died and you had inherited $1 million. You just had to send him $10,000 and you could get the money? It's the same dudes. It's fascinating. They've evolved. And what they're using is all of the information that people, I'm sorry, stupidly put out about themselves on social media. So if you're putting your name, if you're putting your address, if you're putting your phone number, if you're putting your relationship status, or going online publicly and saying, oh, I just broke up with my partner, I'm so sad. You are leaving yourself, I don't mean to blame the victims, but you're leaving yourself open to these scammers because they come and they mine your personal life for information and they use it to scam you. And we've seen it over and over and over again. So do not put information about yourself out in public. If you have to be on social media, and I advise you to delete it all for any number of reasons, but if you have to do it or you want to do it to connect with your friends, only friend people that you know in real life, and do not let anybody else see your information. But this is a fascinating topic on so many levels. And here are some interesting examples. These are 2 that we've gotten from our research work in Tanzania, where this was a Tanzanian wealthy man who was supposedly offering to invest. You just had to put some money into his investment fund, and then he was going to give you all these returns. This was, I think, a fake job, and this was a case involving Bruno Mars. Somebody set up a fake Bruno Mars account and scammed a woman in Texas out of about $200,000. I mean, the gist was Bruno Mars was on the road. He couldn't get cash. He needed her to lend him some money. Of course, he's Bruno Mars. He can pay it back, right? And she went for it because this criminal had been grooming her for months into thinking he was Bruno Mars. And I want to also say we've talked to a number of people who have been scammed, and it's easy to say, oh, what an idiot. Of course Bruno Mars wasn't dating a middle-aged woman in Indiana. But these criminals are incredibly smart about the way they do this, and they groom people over a matter of months. And they have particular tricks that they learn to get people to believe them. And so we have a number of red flags that we try to publicize that people should know. As I said, in the worst cases, these scams online will lead a person into human trafficking. One NGO survey found that about 55% of trafficked teens in the United States first met their trafficker online. We think the number is higher in most of the world. Again, people put a lot of information about themselves on social media, and that creates the situation where a potential trafficker can seek out somebody that they see as needing money, as being out there looking for a job, as having struggles with their family or self-esteem, or having just broken up in a relationship and maybe looking to move. So again, people put out a lot of information about themselves without any limits on where that information goes. And this is another issue where it's very hard to get your arms around how big the scale of the problem is. It's another thing that we would like to be studying on a more systematic level. What we can see, particularly in Africa, is that there are a lot of ads both looking for jobs, a lot of them in the UAE and Qatar, claiming that, we're going to take you, we're looking for people to work for us at this office or at a hotel. We're looking for young women. You need to be, the salary's attractive, and so should you be. You've got to send us your photo. And a lot of the groups that work, the NGOs and activist groups that work in human trafficking, focus their energy on victim rescue and repatriation, which is a noble thing to do. But one of the problems that we see is that there's not a lot of effort to get in front of this and to try to stop people before they go down this, before they contact a group like this and end up giving up their passport and end up being sold. Then they often will get sold on social media. So there's two sides of the problem. Similar to human trafficking in the United States, that people get predated and lured into human trafficking online, and then they get sold through the platforms as well. Wildlife crime is actually how I got involved in this issue, and there is an astonishing amount of wildlife for sale on social media platforms. Again, especially Facebook, because it is used the most globally, but there's a number of Asian, in particular Chinese apps like Weibo, WeChat, that also have huge markets for wildlife products. You see a lot of wildlife products like ivory, pangolin scales, tiger skins, all sorts of teeth and bones. But you also see there's also a thriving market for exotic pets, whether it's, if you remember that kind of sensational Netflix series Tiger King, all of those guys were trafficking animals here in the United States through their social media platforms. All the guys featured in that program. So that's a very big market. There's a very big market for exotic pets right here in the United States, but also globally, and especially for exotic pets in places like the Arabian Gulf and parts of East Asia, where you're considered to be much more macho if you have a pet cheetah or a tiger. The scale, again, is huge. As I said earlier, these are areas where there's whole populations of endangered species that are collapsing. Some of the groups that we're monitoring on Facebook have tens of thousands or even over 100,000 followers. And the recommendation tools, which we'll come back to, the algorithms, are part of what's driving this. Because if you go online and you type in something like buy tiger cubs online, and then you find a bunch of groups or pages that are trafficking in tiger cubs, over the next few weeks, Facebook will try and find more things like that. Oh, you're interested in tiger cubs. How about cheetahs? Maybe you'll like this page. We did a study. I think it was in 2019. It wasn't last year. That we called 2 Clicks Away. It's available on our website, where we intentionally went. We set up a team of researchers that we intentionally designed the research for them to mimic the behavior of ordinary people going online to look for wildlife. And so we picked 17 search terms, 17 combinations of search terms in English, French, Arabic, and Indonesian, and Vietnamese. And what we found was that 57% of the pages and groups that we found on Facebook had the words buy, sell, or trade plus an endangered species in the title. So again, that doesn't take expensive if code to find, or expensive algorithms to find. You can type in basic if code that says, the platform could shut all of that down and say, if somebody searches for buy cheetah cubs, do not return search results. And that would shut all of that down. They could basically build something to shut 57% of their wildlife trade, over 50% of their wildlife trade down in a single shift in multiple different languages. Another 27% of the pages that we found were recommended to, pages and groups that we found on Facebook were recommended to our researchers by Facebook's algorithms. And the other small percentage we found in chat among the members of the groups. So it's really important to understand that whether it's wildlife or drugs or timber or human trafficking, the platforms are not playing a passive role. So the platforms, the current law treats the web platforms as if they were a telephone. So if 2 drug dealers get on to the phone, T-Mobile or AT&T or whatever, and they make a drug deal, I don't think it's fair, personally. I don't think you could say AT&T and T-Mobile is responsible for making that happen, even though they facilitated it. And the law is currently written to treat tech platforms as if they were a telephone. They're just a distribution channel. However, the algorithms create a sense, for me, they make the platform more like a publisher or a distributor. They're distributing the information. They're actively choosing which content they're trying to spread. And so to me, that should take away their liability shield. And that's one of the things that's come up in the last few weeks in the testimony of Frances Haugen, the Facebook whistleblower, is that we need to regulate these algorithms better. And we certainly agree with that, although we think we should go more further than that. Here's some examples that we've pulled. Here's somebody selling ivory on Facebook. Also, this is a Facebook post of ivory bangles for sale. I don't know if you have any numbers in these. I should put something up that has the numbers where you can see how many followers some of these people have, because it's huge. In some cases on Facebook, this is an example of somebody who seems to be more of a lone wolf actor, somebody in a range state that's gotten their hands on a couple of ivory tusks and they're selling them online. They've put up a piece of paper so you can see the context for how big the ivory is. Other content where it's more obvious that we're looking at a criminal organization, and they will not only feature pictures of the goods that they're selling, but they'll show pictures maybe or video of their of the warehouse where their shark fin or ivory or whatever is being stored, or they'll show these sort of images that kind of glamorize the gangster lifestyle. We see this a lot out of Mexico and Central America as well, the gangster chic lifestyle being promoted by drug cartels and their activity online. And actually, I wish I had a couple slides about that, because I haven't talked about cartel activity in this lecture today, and I know I'm going to run out of time, but it's another aspect of what we see illicit groups engaging in online is both terror groups engaging in fundraising and spreading their propaganda, but also big gangs, whether it's a group like a multinational gang like Mara Salvatrucha, or some of the big Brazilian gangs, or drug cartels. Anybody from, the Sinaloa cartel until recently had 80,000 followers on Twitter. on their official account. They finally got shut down recently. But some of the big drug cartels like the Caballeros Templarios have a huge following on Facebook. And they engage in everything from hosting groups where they coordinate activity between cities, to putting out hits on people through Facebook groups, to using platforms like WhatsApp and Facebook Messenger to threaten people, or to put out threats or to announce killings on Twitter. And on Facebook, to even in one case post that there was a drug cartel in, I believe it was in Nuevo Laredo, that assassinated a woman who had been reporting on the gang through her Twitter and Facebook feed, and they killed her, and then they announced her death by posting. It was the last posting that she made on her own. They posted her assassination on her own Twitter feed using her phone. I'm going to shift for a second for a minute here to talk about the laws governing cyberspace. Section 230 of the Communications Act from 1996 basically it's known as the 26 words that created the internet. It is the law that says that platforms, interactive computer platforms, will not be responsible or will not be held liable for user-generated content. And that is aimed at protecting free speech and free expression, which are things that we hold dear in this country. However, we would argue at the Alliance to Counter Crime that selling fentanyl-laced tablets is not free expression, that selling children for sex is not free expression. It is a crime. And that our law needs to be redrafted to carve out, to protect our rights to free expression online and the liability shield that the companies rightly enjoy, but to articulate that hosting illicit content is not allowed. A couple other important laws, the Children's Internet Protection Act, adopted in 2000 to try and prevent children's access to harmful and obscene content. And then in 2018, what's known as the FOSTA-SESTA Act, which did create a carve-out to the Section 230 immunities for child sex trafficking. Although that law has been hotly contested mainly by the tech industry and people who allegedly are independent, but usually it turns out funded by tech. There are problems with it, I'm the first to say, that need to be fixed. There's also a law passed in 2008, the Ryan Haight Online Pharmacy Consumer Protection Act, which should prevent the sale of fake medicines online. That was intended to regulate the distribution of online prescriptions. It's done very little. It's turned out to be inadequate to policing the amount of drugs and counterfeit medicines that are being sold on social media. There's no law to protect people from work or romance scams. So if you go online and you lose your entire life savings to a scammer, or even just a small amount of your savings to a scammer, there's nothing to protect you. And if your identity is stolen and used in a scam, there's nothing to protect you from that either. There are efforts to change that. Interestingly, Adam Kinzinger, the Republican member of Congress, is also a victim of identity theft. He's also, he's a handsome young man. His identity is used in hundreds of romance scams on Facebook. And so he has actually tabled a law to make that illegal and to address the issue of romance fraud and scams. The other thing that's really challenging about this problem is that it's really hard to apprehend online crime and online criminals, and it's hard to educate people about the problem. Cyberspace is a nightmare from a jurisdictional standpoint. To give you an example, if you have a group of a Vietnamese triad that is hiring Mozambican poachers to sneak into South Africa to kill elephants and rhinos, and then the ivory and rhino horn is trafficked into Asia by those same Asian triads and then sold online on Facebook. That's an actual supply chain that we investigated at one point. What country has jurisdiction over that? I mean, how do you stop that? And particularly when you're dealing with countries like Vietnam, Mozambique, and South Africa, where there's very high levels of police corruption and judicial corruption, it's very hard to get people, to get folks along that supply chain to cooperate with each other and work together to build a multinational case. Plus, a lot of countries in range states, Mozambique is a good example of that, basically don't have conspiracy laws. So you basically have to be caught with a bag of ivory that you're trying to smuggle across the border or or out of a park in order to get prosecuted. But the kingpin that's actually running it and financing it, it's not actually a crime to do that. So the laws between countries are mismatched or they're out of date, especially some of the colonial era laws on crime in sub-Saharan Africa make my head spin. And they don't even, the criminal law in a lot of countries in Africa that we've looked at don't even conceive of the internet. So they predate the internet and they're kind of racing to catch up. But for example, we're doing a big project in Tanzania. They passed a law on cyberspace, but it really has been focused on policing sort of political commentary and essentially restricting free speech, and has been condemned by, justifiably, by human rights groups and free speech organizations, and has led to a number of outspoken political activists being arrested. But these same laws touch very, very little on the problem of crime. So a lot of problem with the laws out there in the world, but even here in the United States, our laws are inadequate to the scale of the problem, and we have highly inadequate resources devoted to the problem of online crime. Law enforcement, not only in many countries, are not equipped to track online criminals. Here in the United States, they're not equipped either from a preparedness or they don't have the resources they need to track this and to understand this. With regard, I think it's particularly tragic right now in some of the parts of the country that are really getting hammered by the fentanyl crisis. There's a mistaken language that is used in a lot of the public commentary about what's happening, which is that we say that there are, I mean, we specifically at ACCO talk about the fact that there were more than 93,000 drug-related deaths last year. A lot of media and even government reporting will say that there were 93,000 overdoses. Most of those people didn't overdose. They were poisoned. They took half a pill or one pill, and it was laced with a poisonous substance, whether it was fentanyl or one of those other uber-strong synthetic opioids, or it had arsenic in it, and there's all sorts of other horrible stuff that is showing up in these counterfeit medicines. But when the police show up at a family's house and their 16-year-old kid is lying on the floor dead, there's all sorts of shaming that goes on, like, well, your kid was a junkie. In many cases, they weren't. In fact, in most of the cases I know, the families that we're working with, they weren't. And so finally, after a lot of work by some of the families that have gotten involved in this since their children were poisoned, law enforcement in a few places that is really getting hammered by this are starting to treat that as a murder scene. And they're starting to pick up the kid's phone, go through who are the last 6 to 12 people that they texted with and who all they had been communicating with, and to start to try and track it as a murder scene as opposed to a traditional overdose. The other big problem is that because the platforms aren't required by law to look for, report on, and remove criminal content, their systems basically rely on other users to report. And Facebook in particular is problematic on that score because the vast majority of illicit activity takes place inside of groups, private and secret groups. And when it happens in groups, pretty much everybody who's invited to be in the group is a like-minded individual, so they're disincentivized to report on it. We've got a number of members that have run or are running undercover operations into some of those groups. That creates its own set of ethical challenges when you have activists doing that kind of work. It should be police. It should be the company not making it possible, but that's not happening. It's very, very hard to get your arms around how big these problems are, and there's all sorts of issues related to tracking it and reporting on it. So lastly, we're going to talk about staying safe online. I'll try to keep this really tight because I know I don't have much more time. I said this before, I'll say it again. If you have to be on social media, I'd advise you to delete it. You'll get so many hours of your day back, but if you're going to have to be on social media, at least lock down your account. Only let people who you know in real life see what you're saying and see what's going on. And even if you're sharing only with your friends, I still would say don't put up too much information about your personal life, your relationship status. People don't need to know where you are all the time. Turn off your location. You don't need to post every damn meal you have. People don't need to know where you are all the time. Have some privacy. You'll start to enjoy it. And don't talk to strangers. Try to limit your communication to people that you know in real life. Now, I know how unrealistic that is, especially with students, especially with people who are engaged in online dating. Lots of people talk to strangers. So my first thing is don't talk to strangers. But I know most of you are talking to strangers. So if you're going to do it, at least make them prove their identity. Try to do a search of the person, or if you're talking to somebody and for whatever reason the photo doesn't look real or there's only 1 or 2 photos of them on their profile, ask them to send you a photo. Ask them to FaceTime with you. If they can't say they can't FaceTime, tell them to send you a picture. And ask them to do something random like hold your cell phone over your head or hold up today's Washington Post or be brushing your teeth or pulling on your ear or something that is random enough that they can't send you just another fake picture. And if they can't, you're probably talking to somebody who's not the real person. If you're looking at a job somewhere, particularly if it seems too good to be true, it probably is. This is something we say to the groups that we work with, in places like Africa and the subcontinent. Hotels don't normally bring somebody from another continent. There's all sorts of expenses that come in from importing somebody from another country. Visas, moving them, relocation costs. So if somebody's offering you something that sounds too good, it's probably BS. But you can check if the company that you're looking at has a website. You can ask them to give you another person, somebody you can email. And if the email comes back and it's a Gmail or a Yahoo, that's a huge red flag. Even if they say they're from a recruiting company, you can run the information on that recruiting company. Next, understand the red flags. Fraudsters will often quickly make promises to you that seem too good to be true. They're going to, in human trafficking situations, they're going to want identity papers. They're going to want to try and sell you and close you as quickly as they can. They're going to claim they can't be connected by video and they can't meet in person, or they want to come and see you and they love you dearly, but they're just stuck somewhere else. And if you just send them money for a ticket, they're going to come and see you next week. If there's no website or other contact person that can confirm what it is they're saying, that's another red flag. Another red flag, if somebody's trying to get you to send money through a gift card, or they claim that they're in one place, but the money that you're supposed to send them is in another part of the world. If they're threatening you or behaving abusively, that's often a red flag as well. And lastly, the depressing note we want to end on is that the tech firms won't help you. You have very few recourses from the law. The law is not in your favor right now as an individual person. So stay safe. I mean, watch your back when you're online. It is a treacherous, increasingly treacherous landscape, and you can help your friends and your associates by spreading these tips. You can follow us online. Our Twitter is @CounteringCrime. We're on Instagram and Facebook and TikTok, and we're trying to get the word out. We have a lot of information on our website, tons of reports, and we're just trying to get it to as many people as possible because we think that this is a major, major threat to public health and safety. And on that, I'll take questions. Thank you.